This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you're most welcome. My name is Catherine Mean and I'll be chairing this session. We're very privileged to have Derek Scally here with us today, whom I'm sure is known to all of you for his interesting and in-depth coverage of Northern Europe. He's the Berlin correspondent, as you know, for the Irish Times and has been there since 2001. He's a graduate of Dublin City University and the Humboldt University in Berlin. He covers politics, business, culture. He's a regular contributor to news outlets, including Die Zeit weekly. I still remember your article on how if only Aldi in Germany was as good as Aldi in Ireland, it would change things, and you are so right. And Deutschlandfunk, WDR radio. He's also the author of The Best Catholics in the World, published in 2021 by Penguin. So we talked for about 20 to 25 minutes about the outcome of the German elections in 2025 and the shifting political landscape in Germany. Then we go to a Q&A session in the room, and we've about 50 or 60 people signed up online. So I'll be taking those questions on Zoom too. So for anybody who's on Zoom, if you would put your questions in as we go along, that would be great. So I will just remind you that today's presentation and the question and answer are on the record. And I'll ask Derek to start.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thanks also to the IIEA team, to everyone here in the room and everyone tuning in. At this time of the year, time is at a premium, so I'm very privileged to have so many of you here this morning. I'm going to talk about 20 minutes, focus mostly on Friedrich Merz and his new government, the outlook, some numbers at present, also some of the characteristics we've seen emerging from Friedrich Merz in the last 6 months, and then a quick run through some of the main foreign policy challenges. So Friedrich Merz turned 70 this time last month, and I was on national radio on that day, and the host asked me, what would I like to give Friedrich Merz for his birthday? And I thought for a second, I thought I'd love to give him 1 free hour flying his own private plane well above the clouds and well away from all of the problems that are defining his chancellorship so far. And he has a pilot's license, but there's no security protocol for a chancellor flying his own plane. And he's more than just a pilot. He's a trained lawyer. He's a husband. He's a father of 2. He's an MEP turned MP, turned CDU Secretary General, turned Merkel frenemy, turned unwilling backbencher, turned BlackRock millionaire, turned political comeback kid. He's the only CDU leader to be elected to head the party on the 3rd go. And he's the only chancellor to have needed 2 attempts to be elected German leader in the Bundestag. So I think you could say Friedrich Merz doesn't take no for an answer. And now he's head of Europe's largest economy. His plane is locked up, so there's no escape. And the last 6 months, I would say, have been more lowlights than high flying. So let's do a quick, for anyone who has to leave in 15 minutes. The bottom line is the pessimist in me says this is a very bad-tempered coalition government. I'm not sure whether it will last a term because they've already burned through so much goodwill in the last 6 months and public trust, and they seem to view even simple agreement on the basics of what they have in their programme for government as an achievement deserving applause rather than, well, that's what you're there for. You're elected to make decisions. You're elected. You're paid to govern. So it seems to be so difficult to get basic agreement. I'm not sure how that can continue for another 3.5 years. On the other hand, the optimist in me says Germany always cuts it fine. It always allows year after year of economic disaster, month after month of hand-wringing and discussions and what the Germans call Bedenkenträgerei, which is like worry words just take over. Every angle, every point, every concern has to be considered, viewed from angles. Should we do it this way? Should we do it that way? And then, as Hemingway said once, the country goes broke slowly, then quickly, and then somebody has to make decisions. That's what happened in the past. And they make another decision, and then another decision, and it looks like Germany's reforming. So a lot of what we're seeing now reminds me of the whole 2004, 2005 period. Many of you will remember that, the era of Schroeder reforms. But until he got to reforms, he had this famous line, which I'll never forget, listening to it in the Bundestag: either we reform or we will be reformed by the markets. And he definitely knew how to put the stick about, and Germany benefited from that for the last 20 years. But you could also say, and it's done nothing since. And what Merz is dealing with is 20 years of reform backlog. Now, I am reminded of the wise words of my predecessor in Berlin, Dennis Staunton, now of the Beijing parish. He said to me, you know, you've been in a post too long, not when you see things coming around again. We see things coming around. This reminds me a bit of the Schroeder years, what we're seeing in Germany. Dennis said, you know, you've been somewhere too long when you think you know how it's going to end. So which will it be in Germany? Will it be a happy 11th hour rescue by the political centre, or will it be economic disaster and a far-right government? Beauty of my job is I don't know. I'm like a piano teacher, one lesson ahead of everybody else. I'm very curious to see how it goes. But before we get into the detail, I'll just give you some quick numbers. So we had the snap election in February, and we're about half a year after Merz took office again with his Christian Democratic Union and its Bavarian CSU allies. They're down 4 points in polls on their election night coverage result to 24.5%. The SPD, the Social Democrats, their coalition partners, they're down 1 point to 14. And the Greens and the Linke left, they're kind of neck and neck, 10 to 11%. But the big shadow over this Bundestag is the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, the far-right populist party. They're on 26.5%. They're well up on election night. Polls generally between 24 and 27%. So a decade after this party was founded in the Euro crisis, a party that calls the Nazi era the bird shit of history, just to fleck the bird shit, is now in some polls Germany's most popular political force. And as if that wasn't bad enough, a new poll out this week showed that the public trust in Germany in every field is at a historic low. How many people trust the media? 22%. That's down from 39% in 2021. How many people trust government? 28%. That's down from 48% in 2021. How many people trust political parties? 17%. 1 in 5 is happy with the government's work after 6 months. 78% are less than happy or not at all happy. How many people are happy with the work of Friedrich Merz? 23%. I think I have to check, but I think he's the 18th most popular politician in Germany. And most of his friends are in equally low places. So, yeah, not ideal. The country is still in economic doldrums. We can go into that if there's questions, but there was a report out by the IFO Institute from Munich, and they're saying unless they present a slightly more ambitious economic reforms, the German flatlining economy, it's been in and out of recession for 5 to 6 years, could continue till the end of the decade. Funny thing is, this is all coming at a time when there's never been more money sloshing around. I mean, Germany has money for everything. It's jammed for everybody in Germany. The trouble is that in opposition, Friedrich Merz presented himself as the sober, traditional CDU man, fiscally reserved, order liberal. Yes, we will provide public money for this or for that, but first we have to cut things back, prune things back to size. That was his election campaign. And then he got into power and he sort of discovered his Woody Allen, like, those are my principles, but if you don't like them, I have others. And his other principles are what he was preventing the previous government from doing, which was, can we please get rid of the debt brake? Can we please just borrow some decent money to invest in the roads, to invest in the railways, to invest in education, because those are returns. The return on that will lift the economy. The CDU blocked that in opposition, and he was in power weeks when he realized, oh, wait, if we don't do that now, if we don't loosen the fiscal brake, the new parliament that has yet to meet, we won't have a majority to do it. So having run a campaign on fiscal responsibility and cut first, reform later, he flipped all that, and his backbenchers have never forgiven him. This is a man who doesn't have a huge political base in the party, but the goodwill he had was just evaporated. So what does this new deal that they've done mean? It means effectively endless money. A blank check for defence and security spending, at least 500 billion for infrastructure, public infrastructure spending, although there's a report out last month saying that the temptation for the politicians, they can resist anything except temptation, and at least half of that 500 billion is now being spent on political pet projects and not on the long-term infrastructure. But still, even 250 billion is a lot for bridges and crumbling autobahn. It's really too soon to say how this will pay off, if it will pay off, if it needs even more money, if the German building companies can even deal with so much money and so many jobs. And as regards the defence spending, I mean, just to contrary to President Connolly's claim, I mean, they have a blank check on defence spending. It hasn't lifted the economy so far. That was the implication she was making. So we'll see where it goes, but what she said on defence reminded me a bit of the claim I heard here during the refugee crisis. So Germany's taking so many people because it needs people for the care industry or for old age care or for nursing, all the jobs Germans wants to do. I'm not sure that was the main priority back then, and I'm not sure spending money on defence now is about lifting the economy. So it's the challenges. Maybe actually I've mentioned migration and asylum, and that's definitely somewhere where the government has got off the ground quickly. We have a new Interior Minister, Alexander Dobrindt, who's from the Bavarian Party, the CSU, which is always traditionally more right wing, and they've all German borders have checks. They have started sending people back, failed asylum seekers. There's a huge backlog. He's saying we're getting hard on this. We're non-nationals with criminal records out to go. It's not as simple as that, but they are taking credit for lower asylum numbers. But the numbers were kind of dropping anyway. So how much is to do with their new policy and how much is just because fewer people are showing up? So far this year, 85,000 people have claimed asylum in Germany, but this time, so that's up until now, and the number for all of 2024 was 250,000. The number for the year before was 350,000. So maybe it's because they have border checks, permanent border checks, and the traffickers aren't doing the business they used to, or maybe just people aren't coming. But that is something that has needed to be addressed from a CDU perspective, and they have addressed it. Generally, there's a right-wing pivot in the rhetoric and actions that's hard to ignore. Friedrich Merz isn't immune to that. He got into applause from one side and anger from another side of the political spectrum for expressing concern about the German cityscape. How the city is looking different. Translation to black and brown people hanging around train stations and pedestrian areas. Merz himself has conceded he went a bit too far, but I think from a dog whistle perspective, it may have been effective. It was certainly a well-chosen term, and there are others in the party who want more of that. Just this week, the government has said they won't be honouring the last of their commitments to Afghanis who were their local staff in Afghanistan. They brought in many of them, but it's no longer politically expedient to bring in the rest. So they've just said, we won't be doing that. There are many problems coming their way next year. I think I'm working on something at the moment just about that the challenge to Germany is actually coming from below, because they have so many, they've given towns, communities, municipalities, county councils so much extra things to do, including migration and asylum, but they haven't given them the money to deal with them. So we're dealing with a lot of towns that are effectively bankrupt, towns where the AFE is coming in much stronger than a national level, and where it's not clear whether or not the other party will be able to resist political cooperation with them. And which brings us to a big issue, which is the Brandmauer, the so-called firewall. Is it a fact or is it a fiction? The firewall against cooperation with far-right AFD. I'll return to that a little later on. Or will I?
Maybe questions.
Questions, exactly. How is government going for the Merz administration? They would say, look, we have a lot to deal with. A lot has been left lying around for 20 years, plus we've got all the international challenges to deal with. Just in the last 3 months, we've had 2 rows dominating things, and I think they both share something which bodes ill for the future, which is actually arguing about the window dressing and not about the actual issue itself. There were 2 issues. One was conscription, and the other was pensions. On conscription, the government spent 3 months arguing not about whether or not they want conscription, like young people, again, obligatory conscription, but whether or not they would send a questionnaire to young people in the new year about whether they would take medical. So they need about 250,000 people in the armed forces if they're going to reactivate conscription, compulsory conscription, but they aren't actually there yet. They spent 3 months arguing about the step before that. Can we send a questionnaire? And there was a similar row over pensions, government secures pension deal headline. No, they haven't. Germany still has a huge pension demographic time bomb, but it spent 3 months arguing over whether it will have a 48% floor on national pensions based on your average income. They haven't worked out how they'll pay for that. They haven't worked out who will pay for that. And that's been kicked off down the road to another government commission. So in both cases, they've expended 3 months of their 5 to 6 months in power arguing over deck chairs on the Titanic and not on the iceberg. So again, if you squint your eyes, to me, this looks and sounds an awful lot like the last government. We know there's big things to do, but why don't we address the little things instead? And it's important to remember the German political centre is not what it used to be. When Angela Merkel had the first of these grand coalitions 20 years ago, her government had 73% seats. 20 years on, same parties, they have 45% of the seats in parliament. So the centre is just about holding, but we don't know where it's going. I won't go into the other parties. The SPD, they can't believe they've got the Department of Finance, welfare, defence. So you've got the two biggest spending departments under their control, plus the person who writes the checks. And they're sort of the tail is wagging the dog of this government. They have 14-15%. They've never been so weak in polls, and yet they know that Friedrich Merz and the CDU have no alternative to them, and they're using that power. Whether that is a long-term political strategy going to work, we don't know. The Greens and the left, if anyone wants to ask about it, that's fine. They've got 10-11%. The left have had a bit of a renaissance, but the Greens are still trying to find their feet. The AfD, strength to strength. Some people say, yes, they're on 26%, but their voter potential is less than 30%. So if you ask in polls, could you ever imagine voting for the AfD? 28% say yes. So the experts say, oh, well, they're at 26, their potential is 28, but these are the same experts who said, oh, they'll never get into double digits. Oh, they'll never get past 15%. Oh, they'll never have a 2 in front of their support. So this is going to be a crucial year. I would say the AfD is not so much of interest in Berlin. They're staying quite quiet. Migration issue is disappearing, but we've got state elections coming next year, and the one to watch actually is September in Saxony-Anhalt, which is southwest of Berlin. And some polls give the AfD their 40%, 40. And depending on how many other parties get into the state parliament in Magdeburg, they could have an absolute majority on their own. Now, of course, it's early days. This December, that's September. But it is a staggering state of affairs. I mean, we could do a whole talk on why. Some quick reasons. Saxony-Anhalt has always been the economic bringing up the rear since unification. Their hopes of economic revivals have been dashed over and over again. And most recently, Intel was supposed to come to Magdeburg. That all just went nowhere. So the resentment that they've been abandoned, the resentment that their old industrial base has just been left, it's effectively a Rust Belt community, and there are no new industrial jobs going there. And people's pride have taken the battering. The AfD have just walked straight in there, and that, but 40% is still an extraordinary level of support. There'll be other key votes next year. Baden-Württemberg, traditionally a CDU stronghold in the southwest, they have an election in March. It's been ruled quite happily by the Greens for the last, I think, 3 terms, but the CDU are hoping to take it back. If they don't, I think Merz's authority in Berlin will be highly questioned. So risky times ahead, but what's interesting, I say, as a journalist covering Friedrich Merz, is he is a risk taker a risk taker in German terms, which is as a risk of society. But it does make things slightly more interesting on a day-to-day level. I mean, he is a good talker. I mean, Merkel and Scholz were known for their rhetoric. You know, I mean, I told Merkel's spokesman when we left, I said, you should read how I translated her for the Irish Times. I made her so much more interesting than within the bounds of creative writing, obviously. But Merkel and Scholz, they were both so afraid of taking decisions. There was such fans of procrastination. Their names were both turned into verbs, Merkel and Scholz, and just mean hanging around and doing nothing. Merz, and we haven't quite decided what that is. It will probably mean somebody rushing around a little bit too much. You could say typical man, talk first, think later. But it certainly is refreshing to cover. And if he was here now, he said, look, our government has done a lot. We have got new measures on the way to reduce costs, energy costs for companies, which Germany's industrial base said that's been strangling them. And they've just this week put in a new package that they say will reduce bureaucracy for companies. They'll prune back climate objections, possibilities for big planning projects. So it's coming, a lot done, more to do. But the funny thing and the sad thing is for all of Merz's rhetorical skills, and he's a very interesting person to listen to, at least in German, I haven't yet seen what is the sales pitch. There's been no Agenda 2010, there's been no Zeitenwende, watershed. So there's no packaging so far. And in this day and age, you need packaging to sell it to people. And we'll see if they come up with something like that. What is interesting is the language that he doesn't use anymore. The Brandmauer I mentioned before is the so-called idea of a firewall. We will, as a CDU party, never cooperate with the AFD. Merz actually said, quote, you'll notice I've never used this term, which first of all made a lot of people sit up a bit worried. He says, no, I don't believe in that term. I want to beat the party, but with better politics rather than putting up some artificial barrier. I want it so we don't even need a barrier to them. He also knows that at municipal level, at federal level, county council level, this firewall is already full of holes. If you go to county council meetings, if the AFD have a sensible idea about bin charges, the other parties aren't going to refuse to back it. But it's not at all clear in his party. The Brandmauer, the firewall, he's no longer talking about because he thinks it's a bad idea. Because some in the party are quite open to working with the AFD if they get a chance. So it's unresolved. Staatsräson, this idea of reason of state for Germany's Israel security and the security of the Jewish communities in Germany is the reason of state for Germany. He has discarded that term because he said, quote, it was never spelled out in all its consequences. Now, instead of spelling out the consequences of lashing Germany to Israel in this way, he's just come up with a new term called Wesenskern, or core of one's being. Not sure what it means yet. He said criticism of Israel, he said this last Sunday, is not just possible, but sometimes even necessary. But he said criticism of the Israeli government cannot be used as an excuse for anti-Semitism. I'll just leave you to digest that one. I think it's very interesting. In the past, German government said it's possible to criticize the Israeli government without it being decried as anti-Semitism. Now he's saying criticism of the Israeli government cannot be used as an excuse for anti-Semitism. There's a huge dilemma there. Merz touched on it when he was visiting Jerusalem. The dilemma is, are Germany's sense of obligation to Israel and its sense of obligation to international law and human rights. And at least he mentioned the dilemma, but I think we're still where Michael Martin said early in 2024, when he was Taoiseach, he visited Berlin, and he said, I think that after the Gaza war was up and running, he said, I think Germany's position is, quote, still constrained by the historical prism of the Holocaust. I think that still applies. And 2 years later, I don't really see any real thinking in Germany about how do we get out of this corner we painted ourselves into. Some people would say the Holocaust seems to be looming larger in German minds or in the German rearview mirror as we all move away from that huge tragedy. Many people I know in the diplomatic field in Berlin are horrified, outraged by their inability to get humanitarian aid into Gaza, but that's never been reflected in public utterances. Younger diplomats in the department, in the foreign ministry in Berlin, have expressed their outrage. They said, we cannot work. This is not foreign policy that we can back. So there is outrage, but the older diplomats and the people in the Chancellor and so on, they're saying, well, Germany is the only country in Europe that Israel still listens to. They may not heed us, but they listen to us, and they say, we could go Ireland's route, but what has Ireland to show for itself? The Germans would say, a closed embassy and a reputation on this issue that succeeds itself around the world for good or ill. So that would be what I hear in Germany on Ireland and on the Israel-Gaza issue. Just keeping an eye on the clock here. I could go into a lot more about the Irish citizens getting into trouble, coming into conflict with the law. I've got a big article coming on Monday on that. If anyone's interested in that, I can talk about that. But yeah, huge questions to be asked about public demonstrations, police violence, and also the means to police police violence. I'm just with an eye on the clock, I might just skip over that. Just to finish up then, some quick foreign policy highlights. I think it's really interesting. We have a CDU foreign minister for the first time in 50 years. Usually in Germany, the foreign minister is the junior coalition partner and the CDU would take the chancellery. Now we have a CDU foreign minister, which means there's far less wiggle room on foreign policy. Before you could have two people talking out of the side of their mouths. Now you have a CDU foreign minister who's done a really good, solid job, but he seems to be a reality-based foreign minister, and the CDU isn't always, as a party, isn't always looking for reality-based policy. I'll give you an example. He was in Syria, standing in the ruins of Syrian cities, saying there's no way people can move back here. Cut to Berlin, outraged CDU people saying, no, we want them all to go back because the AfD and they're back. Vodafone is standing his ground. On Israel, that's really interesting. Vodafone was a bit more outspoken on Israel when he took up office 6 months ago. CDU was outraged. He softened his line. Now the CDU is kind of back where Vodafone started back in May. Again, by Irish standards, not a hard line, but by German standards, a bit more robust. So people were kind of saying, oh, he's not going to last long. But it's interesting to see that his reality-based approach to foreign policy. But there is a sense of powerlessness also on China. Again, I won't go into detail, but he was there this week because his previous visit he cancelled because he got no meetings. So the Chinese are definitely flexing their muscles. He's there saying, we'd love a bit more certainty on rare earths, if you don't mind. Plus, they seem to be continuing the line of the previous governments as China as a partner and a rival. And last month, it established a committee of experts to advise on security-relevant trade relations with China. If I'm perfectly honest, it looks like the frog in the pot with the water is slowly realizing, to mix my metaphors, that its goose is cooked. Next year will be crucial, I think, on the car industry in particular. BYD, Build Your Dreams, or Build Your Nightmare if you're in the German car industry. They're going to be opening the first plant in Hungary, last time I checked, in October. Made in Europe, Chinese cars. Volkswagen are finally getting their act together, and they say we'll have a cheap €25,000 Volkswagen people's car from the summer, manufactured in Spain, not in Germany. So maybe they'll be able to fight back, but I don't really see where the car industry is going. I'll be interested which of the German companies will be first to have a partnership with the Chinese company. A lot of them have low-level partnerships on battery, but an actual partnership that eventually turns into a takeover. Rearmament I could go into, but I'll just say one thing. Rheinmetall's shares before the Ukraine war were €90. They're now €1,500. But we had an interview with the foreign press with the head of Rheinmetall earlier this month, and he told us we want peace on Earth. So I thought, what a lovely, touching seasonal message. I could talk about Trump, helplessness. It's interesting. Merz was opposition leader at the Munich Security Conference, where J.D. Vance gave us an infamous speech saying that the threat to Europe wasn't Russia, but from within, cracking down on democracy and freedom of speech. Merz gave a very good, robust pushback on that. But it's interesting, the new document that came out of Washington is effectively the same thing. He hoped he had a good link to Trump, but the main thing you hear from the chancellor is we don't know who to talk to get to Trump. We don't know who is behind Trump or who is who is Trump's ear, and we'll see what next week brings. I mean, Merz has tried to be leading on Ukraine diplomacy. There's talk of this meeting next week in Berlin, and with this new European proposal of potential territorial concessions. European Commission is pushing back against its budget ambitions to expand the budget. They also got a deal to walk back this idea of banning all CO2 emitting engines by 2035. So he can send that in German as a foreign policy. But so to round up, I mean, we've still got the Trump tariffs, energy prices, China. The Merz government is doing what it can. Its investment projects are quite ambitious, but as I said, I don't really see a narrative or a momentum to it yet. There's still elephants in the corner like nuclear energy. This week, Poland got European subsidies to build a next generation nuclear power plant. Berlin proudly blew up a nuclear plant cooling tower just outside Frankfurt as part of this pivot away from nuclear energy. I mean, watch this space to see where that works. And as I said, Merz, we can only wish him well, can't we? But 1 in 5 is happy with his work. That means 4 and 5 aren't. But at least if things get bad, he can get his plane, he can fly away.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.